Right now, thousands of green card holders across the United States are on the brink of facing travel restrictions they never imagined would apply to them. If you or someone close to you has a green card and any international trip planned in the coming weeks, what you're about to hear could be the difference between walking back into your home as usual or being stopped at the airport with your entire future suddenly in doubt. January 20th is not just another day on the calendar, it's a pivot point. New executive actions are set to sharply change how green card holders are allowed to leave and re enter the country. And these changes are far more serious than most people realize. We're talking about tougher screening, longer and more intrusive questioning at airports, expanded powers for border officers, and new documentation expectations that can easily catch even longtime residents completely unprepared. What makes this so urgent is that none of this will be announced to you as you travel. There won't be a sign at the airport saying the rules have changed, no reminder at the gate, no built-in second chance if you don't have what you need. By the time you feel that something is different, it may already be too late. Immigration lawyers are already hearing from people who are panicking. Flights are booked, family visits scheduled, business trips arranged, and suddenly they're not sure whether they'll actually be allowed back into the country they've called home for years. The hard truth is that simply having a green card no longer guarantees a smooth return to the United States. Assuming that it does can put everything you've built here at risk. This moment is different, and it cannot be brushed off as just another immigration story that will fade away next week. This is not a minor adjustment hidden in legal language. It represents a real shift in how permanent residency is being treated. For decades, there was a shared understanding about what a green card meant. You followed the rules, waited your turn, passed background checks, dealt with piles of paperwork and long periods of uncertainty. Once you were finally approved as a lawful permanent resident, that status was your foundation. It meant stability. It meant you could travel abroad and come back home. It meant you could work, raise a family, and plan your future without constantly worrying that one misstep at the airport would unravel your life. That quiet promise is what millions of people built their lives around. Now that foundation is being reinterpreted. The new approach treats permanent residency less like a settled, durable status and more like a conditional privilege, something that has to be continually demonstrated and justified, especially at the border. And that doesn't just affect recent arrivals or people with complicated histories. It touches long-term residents, tax-paying workers, parents of U.S. citizens, and people who have done everything correctly for years. The real danger is not just the new rules themselves, but the false sense of safety many green card holders still have. The idea that because they've never had trouble before, they never will. The belief that past experience guarantees future outcomes. That mindset is exactly what leaves people most vulnerable. They land in the U.S. after January 20th expecting the same quick process they've always known, only to discover that the assumptions they were relying on no longer apply. For a long time, holding a green card came with an unspoken message. You belong here. You earned this. You survived the line, the interviews, the checks. Once that card was in your wallet, life finally felt secure. You could book international trips without fear, visit aging parents, attend family events, deal with emergencies, or just take a vacation, trusting that when you returned, you were coming back home. At the airport, the pattern was predictable. A few basic questions, a quick look at your documents, a stamp, and you were on your way. That sense of normalcy shaped how people lived. Careers, family plans, and long-term goals were built on the assumption that permanent really meant permanent, as long as you avoided a few clearly understood problems like very long trips or serious criminal issues. For many years, that expectation was mostly accurate. The system largely operated on an assumption of trust once residency was granted. What's changing now goes right to the heart of that expectation, but it doesn't do it with loud announcements. There are no alerts popping up on your phone saying green card rules have changed. The shift shows up in how discretion is used, how guidelines are interpreted, and how authority is exercised at the border. From January 20th onward, your experience re-entering the U.S. as a green card holder will rest far less on the fact that you were approved years ago and far more on a real-time assessment made the moment you arrive. Customs and Border Protection officers are being given broader room and stronger encouragement to examine permanent residents more closely than before. Your history, your travel patterns, your daily life, and your future plans, it can suddenly matter a lot more than they used to when you stand in front of that inspection booth. The system is moving away from automatic trust and toward ongoing evaluation. That means every international trip now carries a degree of risk that simply wasn't there for most green card holders in the past. Picture what this looks like when you land. You step off the plane after what you considered a routine trip abroad. Maybe you were gone for 2 weeks, maybe a month. You're tired and just want to get home. You line up for passport control, assuming the same quick process you've always had. Under the new protocols, that expectation can change fast. Officers now have more space to decide that you should be sent to secondary inspection, even if nothing obvious jumps out at first glance. Once that happens, everything slows down. You're taken aside. The questions become longer and more detailed. Your travel history is pulled up on a screen. Past entries and exits are reviewed. Your answers aren't just checked for basic truthfulness. They're weighed for consistency with the record. The officers aren't simply confirming your identity. They're making an on-the-spot judgment about whether, in their view, you still truly reside in the United States as a permanent resident. And those judgments are not being made by a judge in a courtroom after weeks of preparation. They're being made by frontline officers at the port of entry, often quickly, based on their training and the guidance they've been given. That's why preparation matters in a way it didn't before. Once you're standing there exhausted after a long flight, "I didn't know the rules changed" doesn't help you. At the center of all this is a concept many people have heard of, but few really understand: abandonment of permanent residency. Legally, this isn't new, but the way it's being applied is changing in ways that can trap even careful, law-abiding residents. Abandonment does not require a crime. It doesn't require bad intentions. It doesn't require you to give up your card deliberately. At its core, it's about whether the government believes you still genuinely treat the United States as your permanent home. In the past, that question was usually addressed slowly and in limited situations. Now, officers at airports and land borders are being trained to make initial judgments about abandonment right there, in real time. They look at how you've been living, your travel pattern, your work, your ties. They decide whether your life appears centered in the US or drifting somewhere else. The dangerous part is that this is not about what you feel in your heart. It's about what your behavior shows on paper and in record systems. You might truly intend to live here forever, but if your movements and activities suggest something different, that intent can be doubted. Many green card holders assume abandonment only becomes an issue if you stay outside the US for a year or more. While very long absences are still a major warning sign, the new focus goes beyond that simple rule of thumb. Officers are now encouraged to look at the pattern, not just one trip. Do you leave the US often? Are your trips getting longer? Are you spending more nights abroad than at your US residence? Even trips that are individually short can raise questions if they form a pattern that looks like you're living somewhere else and visiting the US instead of the other way around. Someone who flies out multiple times a year for a few weeks at a time, works remotely for a foreign employer, and keeps strong, active ties abroad may suddenly be seen differently under this lens. No single entry stands alone anymore. Each one adds a chapter to a story, and officers are being told to read the whole story. Once they start digging deeper, they weigh your US ties against your ties elsewhere. They look at whether you have a steady job here or earn most of your income from abroad. They look at where you have a home, where your close family lives, where your bank accounts and obligations are, and where your day-to-day life actually happens. Filing US taxes doesn't just meet a legal requirement anymore. It signals ongoing commitment. Having a lease or mortgage, utility bills in your name, and consistent work in the US all help show that America is your real base, not just a stopover. On the other side, earning abroad, owning property overseas, or spending a lot of time out of the country without a strong paper trail of your US life can quietly undermine that picture. None of that means you've committed a crime, but under this new approach, how things look matters, and it matters at the exact moment you're trying to come home. There's another layer many people overlook until it's too late: what officers can learn from your phone, laptop, or tablet. At the border, privacy rules are not the same as they are inside the country. Customs and Border Protection has broad authority to search electronic devices. Under the new approach, that authority is being used more often and more seriously. These searches are not random curiosity. They're a way to see whether the life you're describing matches the life you're living. Messages, emails, photos, calendar entries, documents, social media posts, even parts of your browsing history can be looked at. Officers are trained to spot contradictions. If you say your home and work are in the US, but your device is full of conversations about settling abroad, working for a foreign company long term, or organizing life in another country, that becomes a red flag. Even casual comments or posts, jokes, throwaway lines, optimistic talk about moving back home someday can be misread in a tense setting. A single message about living abroad for a while can be taken very literally by someone whose job is to decide whether you've shifted your life away from the US. Once doubts are raised, the burden flips to you to prove that your residency has not been abandoned. That's why just showing up with a passport and a green card and hoping for the best is much riskier now than it used to be. Documentation and preparation are your shield. If you end up in secondary inspection, you want to be able to quickly show that your life is rooted in the United States. That can include recent U.S. tax returns, especially if they show you've been reporting global income correctly. It includes clear proof of your address here. Leases, mortgage statements, recent utility bills. It includes proof of U.S.-based employment, such as pay stubs, an employer letter, or records that show your job is anchored in the U.S. If you had a valid reason for a long or frequent trip abroad, caring for a sick relative, working temporarily for a U.S. employer outside the country, studies, or other obligations, it's far better to have that supported by documents than to rely only on your spoken explanation under pressure. The goal is not to confront officers or argue. It's to reduce uncertainty. Border inspections often hinge on whether things seem unclear. When officers feel they don't have the full picture, they are more likely to escalate. Clear, organized documents help align your story with your record. They show that your time abroad was temporary, had a purpose, and always pointed back to your life in the U.S. Another issue that causes unnecessary problems is the status of the green card itself. Technically, your underlying status doesn't vanish just because the plastic card expires, but traveling with an expired or almost expired card gives officers an easy reason to slow things down and ask more questions. If your card is getting close to the expiration date, renewing it before you leave the country is one of the simplest ways to avoid extra trouble. If you're a conditional permanent resident, for example, your green card is based on a relatively recent marriage and is only valid for 2 years, you need to be even more careful. Conditional status has its own set of deadlines and filings, and under the current environment, small oversights that might once have been forgiven can now become central issues. All of this reflects a shift in who carries the burden. In the past, the system tended to assume that a green card holder belonged in the U.S. unless there was clear evidence to the contrary. Now that presumption is weaker. The expectation is increasingly that, if asked, you can demonstrate that your residency is real, ongoing, and central to your life. That doesn't mean you should panic. It means you should be aware. It means treating international travel as something to prepare for, not something that always just works out. It means looking honestly at how your situation might appear from the outside and making sure you're ready if someone asks you to prove what you already know, that the United States is truly your home. Even if you're careful, you should understand what actually happens if an officer decides your case needs closer review. Secondary inspection is the stage that many permanent residents find the most frightening. Being sent to secondary isn't automatically a punishment, but it is a sign that there are questions. You're taken to a side area away from the main lines. Time slows. Officers may scroll through years of your travel records, check older visas, and look for patterns. The questions get more specific. Where exactly do you live? Who lives with you? Where do you work and for how long? Why were you out of the country this time? How often do you travel? What are your plans for the coming year? Every one of those questions is aimed at a single bottom line issue. Does your life still clearly line up with being a permanent resident of the United States? During this process, officers can go through your luggage, your papers, and your electronic devices. They can press you to resolve any inconsistencies, no matter how small they seem to you. You may be exhausted, stressed, or confused. That's exactly why knowing in advance what this process looks like matters. At the end of secondary inspection, a few outcomes are possible. Sometimes, after questioning and review, the officer decides your status is valid and your ties are clear and you're admitted as usual. Sometimes you're allowed in, but with a note or warning in your file, meaning your next entry could be more closely examined. In the most serious cases, the officer may decide there's enough concern to challenge your permanent resident status. This is when some people are presented with a form stating that they are voluntarily giving up or abandoning their green card. Being handed that form is overwhelming. You may feel like signing it is your only option. But it's critically important to understand that you are not required to agree that you abandoned your status if you truly believe you didn't. You have the right to refuse to sign. You have the right to ask that your case be reviewed by an immigration judge, where you can present evidence and argue that you maintained your residency. However, refusing to sign does not end the problem. The officer can still decide to deny you entry at that moment. You can be put on a return flight and forced to fight your case from outside the United States, which is far more difficult, slower, and more expensive than dealing with it from within. That's why so many immigration professionals emphasize prevention. Once you reach the point where your status is actively being challenged at the airport, you've already lost control of the situation. Even if you ultimately win, you may be separated from your home, job, and family for a long time. The best strategy is to avoid getting anywhere near that point. That means planning your trips, your time abroad, and your documentation so that every piece sends the same message. The United States is your permanent home, and your travel is temporary and clearly defined. All of this has also pushed many green card holders to confront a big question they may have put off for years. Is it time to apply for U.S. citizenship? For those who qualify, naturalization offers a level of security that permanent residency no longer fully provides. A U.S. citizen has an absolute right to enter the country. Their status cannot be taken away at the border based on an officer's judgment in that moment. Applying for citizenship takes time and effort. There are fees, forms, background checks, and a test. It's not a small step, but for many, the peace of mind it brings now is worth that effort. Not everyone is eligible yet, and not everyone's home country allows dual citizenship. For some, the decision is complicated or simply not possible at this time. If citizenship is not an option for you right now, then the focus must be on protecting and strengthening the status you do have. That means being deliberate about how often and how long you travel, keeping strong, visible ties in the U.S., keeping your documents and status up to date, and understanding how your choices look from an immigration officer's perspective. The era where you could assume things would always work the same way is ending. It's being replaced by an era where awareness and preparation are essential. The main lesson from all of this is not that you should be afraid to travel, it's that you should no longer treat travel as something automatic. If you have international trips planned after January 20th, take the time now to look at the full picture of your situation. Look at your travel pattern over the last few years, not just this one trip. Look at your ties to the United States, home, work, family, taxes, community, and ask whether they'd be clear to someone who doesn't know you. Think about whether your answers, your documents, and even your digital footprint tell the same consistent story. This does not mean green card holders are suddenly unwanted. It means the space for error is smaller. Small oversights that once slipped by can now have disproportionate consequences. The people who often get hit hardest are not those expecting trouble. They're the ones who believed they were completely safe. Long-term residents, frequent travelers, people who have done the right thing for years and never imagined they'd have to defend their right to come home. This shift is unsettling, but having a clear picture of what's happening puts power back in your hands. You can't control policy, but you can control how prepared you are. You can't erase officer discretion, but you can greatly reduce doubt about your situation. Travel with intention. Keep your records in order. Answer honestly and consistently. And if your case is complicated, long absences, foreign work, family emergencies abroad, don't wait until you're in an airport line to think it through. Talk to a qualified professional in advance if you're unsure. The goal isn't to live in fear, it's to move through this new reality with your eyes open and your options protected. If this explanation clarified things for you, consider sharing it with another green card holder in your life. Sometimes a single conversation before a trip can prevent a truly life-changing problem later. And if you want to keep up as these policies evolve, you can like, share, and subscribe so you stay updated. Right now, staying informed isn't just helpful, it's a form of protection.